Okay. We'll start with Dr. Duane Nellis, who has served as the President of Texas Tech University, President of the University of Idaho, Provost and Senior Vice President of Kansas State University, and the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at West Virginia University. We're really grateful for his support to making this program a reality and very happy that he's participating in it with us.
Thank you.
Then you'll hear, thank you. Then you'll hear from Chad Blevins, who is a geographer with the U.S. Agency for International Development and works with their GeoCenter, where he's established and he leads their mapping for resilience and remote sensing programs. Chad has pioneered the use of OpenStreetMap within USAID, and we're very lucky to have him on our team.
Hello.
Then you'll hear from Dr. Brent McCusker, who is an Associate Professor of Geography at West Virginia University, which I understand is a founding member of UCGIS. He is an expert in geospatial analysis of land use and livelihood systems in Africa, and he's been working very closely and extensively with USAID and the GeoCenter, and he's invaluable to our program.
Thanks, Patricia. Hi, everyone.
Thank you. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Nuala Cowan, who is Assistant Professor and Director of the GIS Certificate Program in the Department of Geography at the George Washington University. She is one of the major innovators and national leaders in integrating OSM into the classroom, and she's a co-designer of TeachOSM, and she's very key to our program's educational components. Let's move on to our presentation. We'll get these going here and tell you a little bit about, I'm going to first give you an overview of our work. So what we're creating here is an international group of universities that is interested in the concept of open mapping and mapping for resilience. And we're a global community of university students, faculty, and scholars, and we're interested in creating and also using open geographic data and analyses that address locally defined development challenges worldwide. And the challenges that we're talking about are things like extreme poverty, ecosystem vulnerability, that economic vulnerability as well, food insecurity, and health issues. These are the big questions of our world. And as you know, by looking at some of the maps where there's a lot of missing data, we need to have some greater attention paid to knowledge and data on resilience. And of course, we feel that the spatial data is extremely important for this. There's another challenge that sort of exacerbates all of these issues, and that's the fact that about 1.8 billion of our population is actually youth, age 10 through 24. That's how the UN defines it, and 85% of those live in these developing regions. So with every challenge, there's an opportunity, and the one that we're looking at in particular is the fact that we know that focusing on resilience is really associated with reduced humanitarian spending and also suffering. And so this is a concept that we're really focused on in determining how we're working and what data we're mapping. We're also leveraging what I like to call the geospatial revolution 2.0. It's sort of a combination of the ubiquitous nature of geospatial technologies and also social technologies. And when you combine those things, we've seen this growing community of voluntary mappers basically everywhere. And so this idea that there's all of these young people, and many of them in the developing regions where we're working, is also one of the opportunities that we're leveraging as well as a challenge. So the idea behind the consortium is really to link up this supply or potential supply of the data that we need, the open geospatial data, to the demand for that data and the decisions that need to be made for resilience through an open platform. And we're mostly focused on the OpenStreetMap platform. And in terms of the supply side, we're engaging the world's universities and their students, and they're what Goodchild would call citizen centers. We think they're high-quality citizen centers and sensors and scientists, and that's really the idea behind the consortium. Our sponsoring agency is USAID, and they're essential in helping us move from that data to the decision-making process, and we really incorporate the end use cases into the design of all of the work, because it's really important to have that be clear what the what the end goal is. You don't just move from data to decisions. It doesn't just happen. There's all sorts of things that happen, and it has to have that link from the beginning. So that's the idea. The plan is that we're promoting research and analysis as well as collecting this data, and we're working in the countries where USAID works. It's about 100 countries. And in doing so, we're establishing some opportunities for leadership and fellowship, especially for students. We're very focused on female students as well, and looking at the developing nations. There's also a really amazing resource that USAID has in their mission-based platform. There's probably 30 countries or so that have specialists in GIS, and so they're actually in country and a network that we are collaborating with. We're also, while we're doing this, looking at what is the program impact on research and education integration and quality, the quality of the data, how the decisions actually get made using geospatial data. And so we'll be doing a little bit of research as well in terms of activities. And finally, sort of the mechanism by which we're looking to do all of this is through this International University Consortium, and this is paired with a network of student-led chapters and student organizations that is put in touch with each other. This is where we call what we call the YouthMappers, and we like to say that we don't just build maps, we build mappers. It's very important to have the capacity of the students and have their leadership in play at this consortium. So here are the organizers. You saw our names: Texas Tech University, George Washington University, and West Virginia University, and of course USAID GeoCenter is our organizing sponsor. We just opened up the YouthMappers network starting this February, and already we have 10 additional universities who've signed on to participate. 3 of those are in other countries. The U.S. has had a tremendous response. And in addition to this group, there's probably already another dozen that we've been communicating with that we're helping to have, helping to organize their students so that they can be joining the network very soon. So these are our inaugural members. We also invite you to work with us. There are also a few organizations that we are partnering with that is really kind of affinity kinds of goals. We like to share some synergies. One is the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. We use a lot of their tools and work with them on finding some priorities as well. Obviously the UCGIS, and we invite you to give us your ideas as well on how we can collaborate. We're also doing the GeoJet Badges program to help our students get credentials, micro-credentials, and some support for the kinds of work that they do, and identifying ways with the GIS Certification Institute for their work to be formally recognized for their GISP certifications. So I just want to end with this picture from our website that sort of shows the process of how it works. This is the tab for participate, and if you would like to, after you hear from us today, if you hear what you like and would like to join with us, there is a process for affiliating your university. You are a part of the consortium if you have a student chapter that joins, and it's a pretty simple process. We have a few resources to help you do that, including some model constitution documents if you have an organization, if you want to create your own organization on campus. But if you already have a GTU group or a geography club or even another interdisciplinary club, they can just affiliate with the network and participate in that way. You can also just sign up in this brown box there for news, and if you're not quite ready to join and get our latest newsletters and information. So we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in the question and answer period, but I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Nellis, who is going to talk about the importance of global engagement in GIScience universities.
Thank you, Patricia, and I'm really pleased to be part of this effort. Certainly being globally engaged is a key theme in defining 21st century universities, along with themes like being more innovative, entrepreneurial, diverse, and with a commitment to sustainability. And in doing so, universities must leverage global engagement through integration and connectivity There needs to be buy-in really at every level. If global engagement is seen as an add-on to current activities, it can get marginalized as far as investment of resources and time. Integration of global engagement into core missions, values, and priorities serves to leverage and extend existing resources, and this is certainly true at GIScience universities. In fact, in many ways, it enhances the visibility of GIS science even more fully across the broader spectrum of the universities, extending from the humanities to the social sciences to science, engineering, and business. There's certainly a lot of presidents across the country at public universities who are committed to global engagement. It really needs to be integrated at various levels. So rather than adding on global engagement as new courses or structures, there needs to be an integration and to extend that into existing structures. And incentives and models need to be put in place to encourage such developments. Thus, to be more globally engaged as a university, I have 8 very short points I want to make. One is to add global engagement perspectives to existing courses in the general curriculum. We need to, secondly, synchronize study abroad with degree requirements. For example, at Texas Tech University, engineering now requires all of their majors to have some type of study abroad experience. And this is important that it's integrated within their curriculum. Thirdly, we need to expand service learning and internships abroad, some of which could be linked to efforts like we're discussing today. Service learning, especially in interdisciplinary teams and set in international settings, can be truly transformational. Fourth, we need to make an effort to ensure that international students are fully integrated into the academic and social life of the campus. Certainly, international students enrich our campus communities, but we may not always take advantage of their presence, nor are we working to ensure those students are extended opportunities where appropriate to social activities and organized clubs at our universities. At Texas Tech University, the leaders in our YouthMappers chapters are international students. They're also significant in their value by recruiting new chapters in their home countries. Fifth, we need to make as a priority enhancing university and faculty research strengths in ways that encourage a global framework and problem-solving applications. Again, the incentives and resources need to be there for the faculty. I think of my own career and how transformative my research was in Botswana in southern Africa. Six, we need to create an atmosphere of cooperation and strategic partnerships with entities, especially universities abroad, that may be interested in collaborating with a host institution on various globally engaged initiatives to facilitate and encourage increased global sustainability, prosperity, and improvements in the quality of life. As a university president, I signed hundreds of agreements with universities internationally, but how many of them were truly meaningful? Are there ways to cooperate and truly engage our faculty and students with faculty and students from universities in other countries in collaborations that enhance both of our institutions? The chapter framework that is part of this project is an important dimension as far as the YouthMappers in helping in new ways to make this possible, really creating the demand for a globally engaged university. Seventh, we need to ensure that there's university support structure to sustain efforts globally for the long term. We need to be sure that there's a leadership structure and that activities are integrated into the university's vision and strategic plan. And then finally, we need to take advantage of technology such as geospatial technology to enable innovation, ideas, and talent development capacity building without being limited by boundaries. With today's technology, including GIScience, there's no excuse for not engaging with those who can further or benefit from these technologies and teaming approaches whenever they might exist. So we need to take advantage of this, and certainly with geospatial technologies, this is the perfect opportunity to link with social technologies like online collaborative mapping. So with that, I'd now like to turn to Chad, and Chad's going to talk about open data in countries served by USAID.
Thank you, Dr. Nellis. Hi, I'm Chad Blevins. I'm with the Geo Center at USAID. And just a quick background, the Geo Center is a team within the United States Agency for International Development that's charged with integrating geographic information into our development programs to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of them. We offer a variety of services, including custom geospatial data, which I'll talk about today, providing high-resolution imagery, giving trainings, custom analysis, some social media and futures analysis. And the team was established just under 4 years ago, so it's fairly new. So my role here in the Geo Center is to define these use cases for the geographic data. And I wanted to give some background on past uses of OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap was first recognized as a useful tool to support first responders in the wake of the 2010 earthquake in Haiti. That map helped with response and recovery efforts and was used, has been used for most large-scale international disasters since. Let's see. In Nepal, in 2012, the U.S. Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance requested an updated map of Kathmandu to assist with their Nepal earthquake contingency plan. During that time, we started to, search around and see where we could find an updated map. We discovered that the World Bank was actually in Nepal working with a local group, Kathmandu Living Labs, and they were actually mapping out the city of Kathmandu using OpenStreetMap. So it was an experiment with partnerships. The Geo Center collaborated with the World Bank, Kathmandu Living Lab, George Washington University, and the State Department's Humanitarian Information Unit, and we hosted a mapathon to map this unmapped area of Kathmandu. And then 2 years later, this major earthquake struck the Gorkha district in Nepal. The hours after the earthquake, the OpenStreetMap community came together and they started mapping and adding even more detail to the remote areas that were outside of the Kathmandu Valley. That OpenStreetMap base map was the primary map used by all international search and rescue teams and even the Nepalese government. The search and rescue teams from USAID actually loaded that OpenStreetMap of Nepal onto their GPS devices before they deployed to go help with the response and recovery. So as our vision for expanding the amount of geospatial data evolved, the Geo Center developed a more coherent and resource strategy to guide our Mapping for Resilience program. So that brings us to our project in Mozambique. We began experimenting with designing mapping projects to support these longer-term development projects that weren't just disaster response related. And our project in Mozambique supports the President's Malaria Initiative. Malaria prevention and control is a major U.S. foreign assistance objective, and one of the activities under the President's Malaria Initiative, also known as PMI, is their indoor residual spraying, also known as IRS. This activity helps reduce malaria by spraying an insecticide on the inside of structures that are in these malaria-prone areas of the world. The insecticide is harmful to mosquitoes but harmless to people. So they'll literally have teams of people going home to home in these parts of the world to spray the houses. It's a very resource-intensive process. There's lots of planning involved. They need to figure out how many structures need to be sprayed, how many people they need to hire to spray these structures, how much insecticide to order. And all of this can be supported with the use of geographic data. So for this project, we're using remote mappers through the YouthMappers program who are tracing the outline of buildings, roads, and water features in these key districts in the Zambezia province. And once the remote mapping is complete, Peace Corps volunteers, along with local communities on the ground, will go to a subset of these areas that have been mapped and identify which of the structures are actually eligible to be sprayed. The mosquitoes that carry malaria come out at night, so you only need to spray the structures where people sleep or reside in the evening. So I recently returned from Mozambique, where I was working with the local Peace Corps volunteers in the Zambezia province and training them on how to conduct these field surveys. So this data will prove the efficiency and reach of the 2016 spray campaign malaria efforts in the Zambezia province. So the next project I'd like to talk about, use case, takes place in Bangladesh, where there's another major U.S. government initiative called Feed the Future. Feed the Future focuses on increasing food security throughout the world, and there's a number of Feed the Future projects in Bangladesh, particularly in the agriculture belt of the Khulna division, which is in the southwestern portion of the country. YouthMappers has been supporting this project with remote mapping, and we actually traveled to Khulna and worked with students from Khulna University and taught them how to conduct field work as a pilot project to verify and enhance the remote mapping that was done by the YouthMappers students. So this data will be used by USAID and its partners who are working with these rural farming villages, especially the women-headed farms, to help the communities in the Khulna division improve land management and increase agriculture production, increasing their food security and improving children's nutrition. So there's various uses of this OpenStreetMap product, and the last one I'd like to talk about is some work that's being done right now in Ecuador. It started before the recent earthquake and is focused on mapping areas around the Cotopaxi volcano. On August of last year, Ecuador declared a state of emergency after Cotopaxi shot ash 7 miles into the air, and the volcano continues to spew ash and steam, causing concern for those people who live around it. So again, USAID, in partnership with United States Geological Survey's Volcano Disaster Assistance Program, also known as VDAP, is working to map these areas, vulnerable areas around the Cotopaxi volcano. And the USGS VDAP program is interested in obtaining these building level data to support their volcano monitoring and scenario planning activities. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Brent McCusker.
Okay, thanks, Chad. So part of the research that we're conducting in this consortium with MappersU and the YouthMappers revolves around livelihood vulnerability, and I've been working with USAID Geocenter since its inception in mid-2011. And one of the things that missions, USAID missions or offices overseas is concerned about is using U.S. foreign assistance as efficiently as possible so that we're using less money for bigger impact. So MappersU supports USAID by conducting advanced geospatial analysis of livelihood vulnerability to determine and help program foreign aid funding. As mandated by the agency, we use large, open, and free data sets where at all possible. And our analyses up to this point, we have used publicly available data sets that are generally provided by the World Bank or the International Food Policy Research Institute under large-scale data collection programs that they have. And we then obtain those, which are publicly available as well, but we obtain them, process them, and then conduct our analyses. We've begun to try to link back to some of the youth mapping activities, the OpenStreet mapping activities and exercises, to fill in some of the gaps in our data sets. These are household level data sets that we do obtain. However, not all parts of the countries that we work in are represented, in, particularly in conflict areas or in inaccessible areas or dangerous areas. The bank and the IFPRI will not send the enumerators. And so we have some places in our maps that we have gaps, and we try to fill that in. And as well as the input to our analysis, the output from our analysis will be all publicly available when we complete a specific country. Right now we make all of our outputs as well as scripts, codes, and transform data available via GitHub. That will change in the future as we continue to build our data infrastructure. And so just to talk a little bit about this, this idea of livelihood vulnerability and what we're doing in terms of the research part of the MappersU consortium and specifically some of the activities around YouthMappers. Traditionally, vulnerability has most commonly been used when referring to climate change, and so more of an environmental vulnerability. The approaches have largely been biophysical, but not exclusively. There are definitely people who are working on more social aspects of vulnerability. But the approaches that have been biophysical traditionally have layered together environmental data sets. So you would find something like temperature, slope, precipitation, soil type. Generally, the biophysical production end of an agricultural economy to see how vulnerable households in those areas might be to changes in the environment. We took an approach to try to include more social and economic vulnerability. We call that the Livelihood Vulnerability Analysis and Mapping program within USAID and then within MappersU. So we use that household survey data to understand livelihood shocks. And shocks are disruptions to a normal livelihood system that occur that create a significant hardship for the household. Those can be environmental. In fact, in the developing world, oftentimes environmental shocks are the most widespread. But as we have discovered and learned, health shocks are very important. Food price shocks are very important. Crime and theft shocks are also very important. And so those are the sorts of issues, those more social and economic issues, that often get sort of covered up over environmental vulnerability. So we map the distribution of those relevant shocks when we find them in countries. So those shocks are defined in country. This is not a cookie-cutter approach. The teams are from the host countries who determine the questions to ask, but the themes of the data sets are similar. Under mapping shocks, the slide on the screen right now is showing the total number of household shocks that households experienced between 2009 and 2012 in the Central African country of Uganda. And what we do here is we combine any type of shock that a household experienced, and then we put that on our map to show the distribution and then the intensity of the shock. So in the map here, you can see under point 1, 2009-2010, the highest concentration and intensity of shocks are in the northeast of the country. And then by 2012, the map in the lower right corner, you can see that the intensity of the shock, although not the geographic location, but the intensity of the shock has changed, and it's less. And I'll point out here, if you look toward the north or the top of point 1, the larger map, you'll see that there are areas in between Pitcomb and Moroto that are white, which means we don't have data there. And that's where the YouthMappers program then becomes very important for us as we conduct our research, because we try to fill in, quote unquote, fill in those gaps. So we try to add value to the process of understanding vulnerability. And where we think we add value is that we try to move beyond simple mapping approaches, where we overlay layers of information and then ask what are the conditions leading to vulnerability. Because we do have household level data, we are able to determine correlations to each of the relevant shocks. So when we do this, if we were just to stop at a simple LLS regression, none of our results would be particularly surprising. We would find things like gender, age, distribution of income within the household. Those sorts of issues are strongly correlated to the shocks. But where we think we add a little bit of value is that we start mapping this, and this is possible because we have that household level data. So we then apply a spatial filter model and geographically weighted regressions to our regression model, and we're able to then map where things that are correlated, issues that are correlated to each shock, where they are in space. We try to be very conservative about the results. So for us to say that a specific variable is correlated to a shock, it has to be significant across all three of the regression types that we run, so that we are giving the best available information. And so that looks like this in Uganda. So we found, among many correlations, these are the three that we've examined quite extensively for USAID Uganda, the Uganda office. Youth, the amount of agricultural wealth, and gender ratio within the household are strongly correlated to whether or not households experienced shocks in that previous map, that total shock map. And so what you're seeing here are areas where the correlation is significant. The orange areas for youth, and you can see on the screen there, in orange areas, households with many young people under the age of 15 experienced more shocks. However, in the green areas of the map, those same households experience fewer shocks. And what this allows us to do is it allows us not only to find the contributing factors or variables that are important in understanding the distribution of shocks, but it also allows us to say that in some areas that variable presents a positive relationship, meaning that as the variable increases, the amount of shock increases, or a negative relationship. And that's something that was new as we presented it, as we went through our country-by-country analysis in the 4 countries that we've conducted so far. And so you can see that we are not only able to map the distribution of shocks, but we can map their correlations in this slide. And we have, for each country, we determine those correlations. The other thing that we do is, as we're mapping the distribution of shocks and the distribution of correlations that are contributing factors, we also conduct customized analyses for USAID offices or missions. So for instance, USAID Ethiopia asked us to determine whether or not its Feed the Future program had any measurable effect on households in the country. Feed the Future is a whole government approach to increasing food security in the developing, selected countries in the developing world. And these are very large programs. They're also operating in the same development space as many other types of development programs, and so it's often very difficult to determine whether or not a particular program is having an impact, and then isolate that impact. But because we're using a geographic approach, and because we had a great deal of data for this analysis, we were able to determine that indeed location of a household in a zone of influence for the Feed the Future program meant that the household benefited in some way by being in that zone of influence. Now, the Feed the Future program doesn't overlap, or it's not exclusively operating in the green spaces. So there are other donor programs in those areas, in green in the map of Ethiopia in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. But we were able to isolate the effect of simply being located within that zone of influence. So we're not looking at differences in size of household or rainfall or any other variable as driving the relationship in this particular analysis. So if we started, the program began in Ethiopia in about 2013. We were fortunate to have data before and after the beginning of the program. And we can see across several dimensions that households that were in or near the Feed the Future zones outperformed households that were not near those zones or were outside of those zones in issues like worrying about food security for the next month, eating undesirable foods, having fewer months with food shortages, and in terms of health, in terms of their major illnesses. All of those, across all of those variables, households that were inside the zone of influence, in other words, in some way benefiting from the programming in those zones, outperformed households that were outside of that zone of influence. And so we were able to determine that there was an impact from the location of households in those Feed the Future zones. And we could follow up with that and try to figure out exactly how those households benefited. But because the data set was not collected by the Feed the Future program, we think it was a more independent assessment rather than an assessment of the program itself. So the other thing that we try to do, and I just speak back to that previous slide is we are now trying to integrate this type of analysis with the student volunteers in our student chapter. So our goal is to draw in students to fill in those gaps, as I mentioned. And when we visit the country for our analysis, which we do twice, we meet with local university students to try to link them to their U.S. counterparts so that we form much more of a network, and where the students drive the questions and try to link to development needs rather than us as the professors or the project staff defining those questions. And so that's our goal, is to try to increase that sort of interaction across the globe as we draw in more and more youth chapters. So that's just an example of the research that we're doing, and I'll now hand it over to Nuala, who will talk about using OSM in the classroom.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Nuala Cowan, and today I'm in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we started to use OpenStreetMap in the classroom. So in our introductory GIS classes here at GDOG, we find that we encounter students across multiple disciplines, and for many, this may be their only GIS or mapping class that that they will take in their career. So we want to introduce them to a broad spectrum of GIS technologies and not just the traditional proprietary GIS platforms, which of course we do cover. We want them exposed to open source technology at every level of their education, and I think it makes for a more rounded, more flexible GIS professional in the long term. And our department as well has always been a strong supporter of service learning, and this isn't something that is always easy to fit into a technical class, and definitely into an intro technical class where you have large numbers of students. But we found using OpenStreetMap and the partnerships that we've had with USAID and the Red Cross to map in some of these vulnerable places in the world, we've had an excellent opportunity to integrate service learning at this level. The fact that our students, they get to meet people that work at USAID, they've actually got to meet some of the GIS specialists from in-country, they learn about the application of the data that they create, so it really, really resonates with them why they are doing what they do. I've been teaching introductory level geospatial classes for several years now, and it was around about 2009, 2010 that I discovered OSM. And it took me a little while to think about how I could make space within a traditional GIS class to fit this in, and I finally started to do that around 2011. And in 2013, USAID heard about what we were doing in our classroom because they knew of some of the efforts, the smaller efforts we had done with the Red Cross. And in 2013, we partnered with them and we mapped in Kathmandu with Kathmandu Living Labs that you heard Chad Blevins speak about already. And that was basically the beginning of this ongoing partnership where we work with them twice a year. We have over 100 students each semester that participate in these jobs, and now obviously West Virginia and Texas Tech, we're doing it in this trio partnership, and all these other universities have joined in. So there's a huge sense of community, but students are also adding to their skill set. They're also contributing to service learning. So I think the classroom is a really, really great place to do this. I'm also having trouble moving on. Could somebody possibly move the next slide for me? Thank you so much. Yeah, this is it. Thank you very much. So why is using OSM in the classroom a little bit different to just having a group of volunteers that want to work on a project? So when you're dealing with the classroom setting, it's really hard to just say, hey, we're going to do this voluntary project. It really has to be part of the curriculum. It has to be part of the syllabus. So you're assigning work, and you have to make sure that you have an equitable assignment of work volume. Like, students are not going to say, hey, this is cool, I'll just do as much as you want me to. You know, this has to be graded fairly, and it has to be transparent, and the students have to know, how you have constructed this. And this is a challenge, because you're working with a platform that was never really meant to be nickeled and dimed in this way. We've seen a lot of new tools that have popped up, like the tasking manager, which we use extensively. in order to assign out the work. But it was really never, it was made to kind of divvy it up so that people could work on it collectively, but not that we could like go back and monitor it in a tight way, and that we could actually do validation and assign grades based on validation. But thankfully, over the last couple of years, so I guess about 5 now that we've been working on this, we have developed some pretty good workflows that would allow any instructor that is potentially listening today, that will actually allow them backtrack on their students' work and actually have a very systematic way. We have some rubrics and a workflow that would help them actually grade the work, and if they had the time to do so, validate their students' work as they were moving along. So some of the other challenges as part of the workflow when you're working with a big group of students is, you know, how do you assign it in an equitable way? You're potentially dealing with an area that has a mixture of high and low density infrastructure. You know, we have mapped rural areas like Khulna in Bangladesh. We have mapped exclusively urban like Kathmandu. But when we were working in Mozambique recently, we actually had a mix. So some students ended up in high-density areas, some of the others. So you need to make sure that students have a varied experience. So there's different ways that you can go about doing this. Within the tasking manager that was created by the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, you have the ability as an instructor to go in and scout the area that you will work in. You can check out individual cells, and you can actually assign them to users. So as long as your students have set up an OpenStreetMap account and you have their little username, you can actually say, okay, I'm going to give James one urban cell and one rural cell, and you also have the ability to tag notes on there to say whether something is high density or low density. So this, as you know, involves a lot of interaction on behalf of the instructor, but is a really good way to ensure that people get different experiences in terms of the type of infrastructure they're capturing, but also that it is equitable. Another way that works for us is we actually give quotas to students. These are a combination of nodes that they have traced, but we also may specify that a certain number of those nodes have to be buildings, a certain number of those nodes have to be roads. So if you're dealing with a very, very big group, like we typically have around about 100 students per semester, that might be a little easier to manage. So, you know, tracking what you did, this is something that is evolving over time, especially now that we're working on these assignments with multiple universities. There's always a trade-off between making sure that you have enough volume for your group to work on. If you've given them a quota or an expectation and you actually haven't set up a task that involves enough work, it's kind of disappointing. You could have gotten much more from them. You also don't want to over-assign an area and then find out that, you know, you're not going to complete it in the time given. So that is kind of a process that we're working on, and we kind of ask you to kind of watch this space with us. Chad and I are going to work on that a little bit this summer, and we think that maybe a lot of advanced scoping and maybe having people test the complexity of tracing in a given area so that we can estimate the time that it takes to do, let's say, an example cell would give us a good idea of how many students we would need to work on a given area and how much time it would take them. Okay, yeah, thank you. All right, it's moving on for me now. So we have obviously have a workflow to grade the work after the fact, but we also have a workflow to introduce the students, the groups that we work with to the overall assignment, because again, many of them are quite new to GIS. They're maybe 6 weeks into an introductory class. So we try to make this entire effort seem like a project for our partner or our client, so that, you know, the students know that there's a deliverable at the end of this, and they have to have ownership and take responsibility for any of the work that they do. So first of all, we work with our partner, and I think it's quite important to have a partner in this case. It doesn't have to be super formal. We've worked obviously extensively with the Red Cross. We've also partnered before with the Peace Corps and USAID. And I think the students like the fact that, you know, there's a real-world partner using the data. So we work with that partner to designate an area. We make sure that the imagery that's available in OpenStreetMap is sufficient quality. You don't want to set up this project, have this expectation, create a backstory for students, and then see that a large portion of the area that you want to work with just has Landsat imagery or it's under cloud cover, because that can be very frustrating. So you designate that area and you scope it out. So you set up a task in the tasking manager. Now there is the humanitarian OpenStreetMap tasking manager. You have to have account privileges to set up a job in there. Typically our partners at USAID do that for us because they have privileges there. But there is also an additional tasking manager called the TeachOSM tasking manager that we set up as a side-along project for instructors that want to test the waters a little bit. They might want to set up dummy projects to see how the workflow is panning out, or they may want to set up projects that don't necessarily have a humanitarian imperative, and we wanted a space for those instructors to do that. So if you want project manager privileges on a tasking platform other than the humanitarian OpenStreetMap platform, the Teach platform will work, and you can actually contact me about that and I will help you set up that job. So when you set up the job within the tasking manager, you can actually decide to directly allocate cells within that to your students, or you can decide to give them a node count to work towards. Then we do a training session with our students. So usually we take one regularly scheduled class and we turn that into the OSM training session. We usually open that session by having a briefing from our partner at USAID so that they know the backstory, they know the application of the data. And then we teach them how to use the Tasking Manager platform, and then also the OSM ID editor. So that is the simpler editor, the in-browser editor. Again, because this is an introductory class, we think this is the best tool to use. It's not overly complex. So even if you were doing a module like this in a non-GIS class, I think it's still quite a user-friendly tool to use, but I do suggest having a training session for that. And then finally, when it comes, when students have created the work that they're going to create, the next part is on the instructors to actually go back over the students' work and grade it. So we use a combination of different tools to do this. We gather all our students' usernames. We typically send out something like a Google form, and we have students type in their email, their username, and we'll go back and we will extract the work of each of those students, and we pull it through the OSM GIScience editor, which is a little bit more complicated, but it actually allows us to overlay the unique work of that individual student. We can see it with the high-resolution imagery behind it, and also we can fade in and out a rendered version of the live OSM at that given time, so you can see that students work in the context of other tracers and also in the context of the imagery. And that GIScience platform actually allows you to fix and validate any geometry in the meantime. And actually we are going to feature a little training video for instructors that wish to follow that kind of slightly more complex grading element, and we're going to feature that on the TeachOSM website this summer with some instructions to help guide you through that. So outside of the workflow, which is kind of quite clinical, it's just kind of this is what we do and then that is what we do afterwards. You really have to sit back and think about how you're engaging students in this process. They do a lot of the traditional step-by-step homeworks as part of an introductory class, and we want this assignment to speak to them in a different way. We really feel like having our partner, or our client as we call them in class, come and brief the students that this really, creates a kind of sense of urgency about the project and how important this is, and this is just not another assignment. This is data, and this is the launching, the jumping off point for data creation for a development project, and that's really, really important. Setting aside a section of classes that are devoted to this little module, and not just having it, you know, a set of instructions that you give the students to do as a homework on their own time. We feel like that's very, very important. We almost say, okay, we're going to take a break from the typical class here, and for the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're just going to immerse ourselves in open source. So we introduce the workflow as part of that class. We create the accounts in class. We do a very involved demo of the ID editing tool. We actually begin by having the students edit in an area that is familiar to them, maybe somewhere they grew up or somewhere they traveled in extensively. We don't have them jump right in and edit in the area that USAID wants us to work in. We like them to practice in familiar territory. We typically provide a tracing guide to the students. Usually USAID does an extensive amount of work in prepping this. This introduces them to the area. We have photographs of what the infrastructure looks like on the ground and side-by-side photographs of what the infrastructure looks like aerially. So it helps them to kind of understand the areas that they're dealing with, and they become more confident in the tracing that they do. Obviously, as I said already, we introduce them to the tasking manager system, and we also actually show them how we extract their work after the fact, how we determine that they fulfill their quota, and how we check for quality, because that really kind of helps them when they're working through their assignment, that they kind of know how you're going to check up in the end. And we also show them how to keep track of their own work themselves as well, so they're not just saving and trusting that it's there, that they're kind of constantly keeping an eye on what they're doing. What we like to do is host a mapping party or a mapathon in conjunction with this. So even though we have those formal class times where students are required to attend, we have this other big event that we typically hold at night or in the evening to facilitate the large number of students, because we usually have about 4 classes that participate. And what we found is we have typically anything from 75 to like 80% of the students that have to do the assignment come to this optional mapathon, because it's a little bit more laid back. They've gotten their training out of the way, so they just have to show up. We usually provide like food, we play music, and we have GIS practitioners from USAID and other agencies in the district show up, and they mill about, and you know, they give their 2 cents in terms of image interpretation and things like that. The students really, really enjoy it. And many of them find that they actually fulfill their assignment quota within that. And we find that students that come to the Mapathon, they usually end up doubling their quota. They do much more than is required of them, because they really get into the spirit of the assignment. So finally, I mentioned once or twice TeachOSM. So TeachOSM is, right now it's a website that we launched about 2 years ago, and it was compiled from the collective experience of a group of educators, folks that have taught at the university level, myself and my colleague, Professor Richard Hinton, also some colleagues of ours that have taught at the high school, middle school level, and also at the community level, so not formal education, but they've dealt with community groups and things like that. And we had all taught OSM in very different ways, and we wanted to combine our knowledge base, our experiences, the pitfalls that we encountered, so that we could put this out there for other instructors at whatever level those instructors might be at, so that they would have like a very basic kind of middle of the ground workflow to follow, and that they could also learn from our case studies and how they could apply OSM in unique ways. So as I said, it demonstrates a very basic workflow, and it'll fit the bill for most groups, and then you can modify it as you see fit. This summer we actually have a lot of new things that we're going to add to TeachOSM. Some of them are the more advanced grading workflows that we've developed this particular year, and they will come along with some videos that will actually demonstrate how we do what we do. And that is all from me. Thank you for your time, and if anybody has any questions, please ask them.
Thank you so much. Diana, would you say we have any time at all for any questions? We're at our 60-minute mark.
Yeah, we are almost at the top of the hour right now. Let's see if anyone has a question that they'd like to pose to any of the presenters from this. Take a moment now and please type it into the chat space. Even if we don't have time to respond live out loud right now, we will definitely make sure we're able to respond back, and we'll share those responses back to all of the people who've registered with this. to all of you, that was really interesting. You know, it was one thing that was particularly interesting to me was the extent to which, you know, I had a sense of what the different analytical inquiries could be with these types of data, but it was very interesting to hear you go through all of those, Brent, and give those examples. And Nuala, I didn't know about TeachOSM, and this is, I think, exactly the type of resource that is going to help the instructors and the faculty who work with the youth mapper groups and beyond, you know, get a sense of how this could be something that's much more integrated into the learning experience beyond just, you know, hosting a standalone type of mapping party. So that was really interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. On the yeah, I see we've got a question right here about adding a YouthMappers chapter at a university. I'm just going to respond to this quickly. From my own experience, among other things, I also teach here at Cornell University, and Cornell University is about to hopefully even later this afternoon, we're going to be working with the group of students who want to begin a chapter of YouthMappers here at Cornell. And we found that, as Patricia has pointed out, that on the website too, on the youthmappers.org website, there's lots of information, including examples, as she had said before, of the types of documentation that your university might require. For example, a charter, if your YouthMappers group is going to become an official university student-run organization. So I found those types of resources to be very helpful as well. Okay.
I might add too, Diana, yes, that if you have an existing group, that's also fine. If you have a functioning student group, we've done a lot of affiliations of those groups, and it's really just a simple form to let us know who you are and verify your interest, and then we run that through our board. And we've purposely kept it very easy to be able to join up with the network.
Great.
No cost.
Yes. Yeah. So it'll be good to be able to have those examples of the other types of chapter models up there. We've got a quick question. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I'm going to read these questions out loud, and then maybe we'll be able to respond to them about you know, finding ideas for a TeachOSM syllabus. Maybe that's something that there might be at the TeachOSM website. I'm going to wrap this up only because we are at the top of the hour, and I know people are going to have to head out. As I said, the session has been recorded. If you're still interested in typing out a quick question right now, we'll capture that, and we'll have the presenters, we'll organize the responses to those and send them back to the rest of the group. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very happy to have had a chance to learn about MappersU and about the YouthMappers activity. Stay in touch with UCGIS. If you've got ideas for our webinar series for the next year, we'll begin in September with a whole new collection of webinars, and you're always going to be welcome at these. So thank you again, Patricia, very much for coordinating this today, and thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Thank you.